Hey everybody, my name is Dave Pasquale. I'm the owner of Pasquale Aviation. Today we're going to talk about the ball joint here in this exhaust. As some of you in the Bellanca community are aware, one of our members had a exhaust failure where the back of the muffler can broke out, and then he had to make an emergency landing. Fortunately for him, he did not have a fire. There's an AD that's out that covers this topic, and the AD came as a result of airplanes that had a similar situation, and I've seen firsthand the aftermath of that. And on those airplanes where the exhaust broke right in this area, it dumps all the hot exhaust gas into the engine compartment. Typically it burns a hole through the cowl about that big around, and it'll scorch the side of the boot cowl and even the wing leading edge if it's left go long enough. And really it's a preventable thing. Depending on which version of the exhaust you have, you should be taking the tailpipe here off at either 50-hour or 100-hour intervals. Every time you pull the tailpipe off, you should clean this area here. Clean the ball joint, and then apply anti-seize to it when you go to put it back together. There's also an inspection that gets done where you spray the outside of the exhaust with penetrating oil, and then look on the inside and see if you can see anywhere where the penetrating oil has come through. That'll make a wet spot on the inside. But for today's video, we're mostly going to talk about the tension on these bolts right here. So I'll move the camera in closer and you can see how I actually will tension it. This exhaust on this airplane is an older exhaust. This has a 50-hour inspection interval. And then back here at the tail, where the tailpipe hanger is, this one has springs, which most of the airplanes out there don't have the springs. They'll have metal straps going to a round bushing. It's like a Lord mount bushing to take up the vibration. That was something that Bellanca came up with after this. This is a 73, but it's an early 73. Sometime probably later 73 on up to the most recent model, they'll have that bushing, and it'll either be attached to this engine mount bolt here, or there'll be a tab on the 79 and newer. There's a tab welded here that has two little AN3 bolts on it. But let's get into adjusting this tension. This should be, well, there are a couple things. You should be able to move the exhaust around, and that should be in your pre-flight. When you do a pre-flight, you should grab that exhaust tailpipe and you should be able to move it around. Now it may not move up and down so much if you have the newer style bushing, but it should still be basically free to move. On the earlier versions of the AD, they talked about the tailpipe basically falling down under its own weight when all the bolts were installed. So let me move the camera and we'll get a closer look at the ball joint. So this here is the ball joint. You can see in here, as I move the tailpipe around, you can see the ball joint allows for that movement. If this ball joint becomes tight, it puts all of this load, that all the force from the flexing of the tailpipe goes into this weld right here at the back of the muffler can. And when that happens, the flexing of that rear wall of the muffler can will break that out and break it off, and the whole ball joint will then push back and the exhaust gases will go around it. On this exhaust here, this has the newer style clamp. The older ones had a V-band clamp. I don't see too many of them anymore, and it seems like the ones I do see tend to be worn out. So when this is together, if it's worn out, if you push in or pull out, you shouldn't be able to pull that ball joint apart, but it should still be able to rotate freely like this one does. Now you can see in here, you can see the anti-seize compound in there. You should be using nickel anti-seize. That's what's recommended for exhaust systems. And then you can see on this bolt, you have the AN3. It's a C for corrosion resistant bolt, so it's a stainless bolt with a stainless washer, stainless nut. I've seen variations in the length of the bolt, and then some will have extra washers in here. Basically, the washers set the tension. When everything is put together right, the washer will control how much tension is on there. You just tighten the nut down until the cotter pin hole lines up. And as you can see here, you can see I'm turning that nut by hand. That's pretty typical. You shouldn't have to put a wrench on these nuts. If you do, they're too tight. Because if you compress this spring in here, that's going to pull this clamp together harder, and it's going to make the ball joint much stiffer as the anti-seize compound cooks off. And another thing I do a lot is when you're putting them on, you should be able to rotate this clamp around just like I was doing there, so that you can see each one of these, each one of these bolts. And you can see, like I'm turning it by hand here. That's how these are installed on a Viking. Now, if you have a Cirrus, that's a different scenario. Cirrus, they actually give you a dimension here for the spring, but the Cirrus tailpipe configuration is different, so it doesn't really apply to the Viking. But anyhow, that's it for the exhaust. You should be checking it, and certainly in your pre-flight, make sure the tailpipe moves and has freedom of movement. And then at 50 and 100-hour intervals, depending on which exhaust you have, this should get disassembled. It's a pretty quick process, easy to come off. You got the 3 bolts at the clamp, and then usually 1 bolt back on the tailpipe hanger, and it's apart. There's no reason not to do it. It's a big safety factor. So that's it for our video today. Thanks for watching, and stay safe.